Okay. All right. So I guess we'll just start with the Leonard history. Like the very first one that came over, the very first Leonard.
Well, Jim McDowell, and I've got it down here somewhere.
Okay.
He run it through ancestors because he was working on his wife. And he came up with a James Leonard that come into Pennsylvania in the 1600s. Now, as far as I could ever get it back was Obadiah Leonard, which was my grandfather's grandfather. He's the one that's buried on top of the mountain down at Elizabethton. So you would go from myself to your dad. How would go? No, we'd be going from you to your dad to me to my grandmother, grandfather, grandfather. He was the Leonard, William Obadiah Leonard.
Yep.
Then from him to George Washington Leonard, who had fought in the Civil War,
Okay.
who had the rifle.
That was William Obadiah's dad? Or
Son. I haven't got to Obadiah yet.
No, I'm talking about William. Your grandpa was William
Yeah,
Obadiah.
William. So there's 5 Williams out of 6 generations.
Right.
And
Because
the
he had
only-
all daughters.
The only reason is because their only boy died.
Oh, okay.
So William Obadiah had 4 girls and 1 boy who died.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, I thought his name was maybe William, but he's buried in the cemetery over by Bryant.
Okay.
And I think he was 2 years old. So that's a big reason why my grandmother raised me, I'll tell you. But anyway, so we got William Obadiah Leonard, whose dad was George Washington Leonard, Civil War veteran, whose father was Obadiah Leonard, who they say was some sort of doctor. Some called him a root doctor. Whether he was a regular doctor, I don't know. But that's as far as I've ever traced him back. But my cousin traced him about 4 more generations back.
Wow.
And they come over, some brothers, into Pennsylvania.
Okay.
One of the stories is that they went down around Cambridge, New Jersey, owned a lot of land that was given to them by the King of England.
Okay.
And during the Revolutionary War, since the king lost, they lost the land, but they had donated land to Cambridge University. So there's a Leonard that supposedly donated the land that Cambridge University owned. But they went from there, I think, during the Revolutionary War down into Virginia, which is around Saltville, in that area. And from there, they went down into Tennessee, which is real close there.
Mm-hmm.
You go through Bristol and go to Johnson City, Roan Mountain, and that's where Obadiah Leonard, my great-great-grandfather, I guess, was buried up on the mountain.
Okay.
And they married a Lacey,
Okay.
which gets J involved.
Yeah.
So that's where the Lacey's come in. So you can go fill that space in if you ever get on that ancestor deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I may have it there somewhere where Jim McDowell, because he passed away now, and he did it by accident because he was doing his wife's. But we could never find anything now. All the Leonards have died out almost because
Since.
they were some boys, but they didn't marry.
Okay.
The 2 boys down in Saltville, around Saltville, has got a daughter or 2 still down there. One of them's an attorney. There is 1 boy somewhere, James, I think, but we've lost track of him. Everybody has left Saltville. That's where my grandfather grew up, and he had brothers there and sisters, and there's 1 maybe still alive, I don't know, you know. Then my grandmother's the Morrill side. They grew up around Oh, the Doe River, and that's where he had his mill, and that was destroyed by the flood, and their house washed away, my grandmother always said. And that land there is where Uncle Jim lived, which was a Morrill, my grandmother's brother. And there is still a few Blackwells and stuff, daughter of James Morrill that lives in that area. And I don't think she's passed away yet. But that's what you'll pick up at the reunion sometime
Yep.
when you go down that
Yep.
area.
So is it George Washington Leonard that came to Illinois?
Yes,
Okay.
he came to Illinois to enlist in the Union Army. Because if you were in that part of Tennessee and the South come through, they conscripted you into the Army, which happened to one of his brothers.
Oh, wow.
He had another brother that fought for the Union that was wounded in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and later died. And one of his sisters went through the lines and helped nurse him, or tried to nurse him, and he's buried in Nashville, Tennessee, in the Union or the Federal cemetery down there, like Arlington. And we found his grave, and there's some pictures here of it. So that was John Leonard that died there. And now my grandfather had a brother, John Leonard, that run a store in Fairbury, Illinois, or south of Pontiac. And I was trying to think, that might have been the only boys in that. And the reason that we had the rifle was because my grandfather was the oldest boy
Okay.
and didn't care for guns, didn't hunt.
Really?
George absolutely insisted that he keep the rifle. And he used to come here and stay with my grandmother.
Okay.
And my mother said he was drawing a pension from the Civil War. And we got that picture of him where he's holding the rifle, sitting in the house in Saltville that burned.
Hold on, buddy.
When it burned, he lost a lot of his Civil War stuff.
Okay.
But he had bunting from around the review stand in Washington, D.C. when Sherman come around through the swamps, stopped at, oh hell, down there in where the 8th Air Force Museum is in Georgia. And they absolutely hated people from South Carolina because that's where the Civil War started.
Yep.
They couldn't wait to get to South Carolina. And they went through South Carolina, Charleston. That's who they hit next. And everybody thought that Sherman had been wiped out. There was no communications or anything. They actually went into Savannah. Savannah, the mayor come out and said, if you don't destroy our city, you're welcome to stay here. So they went into Savannah and rested. And there's still graves in Savannah with Union soldiers that they buried there. They come through the swamps of South Carolina, in behind the Confederate Army. That put the Confederate Army between Sherman and Grant. When he hit Charleston, they found out he's very much alive and still going, living off the land. And when the war ended, they marched into Washington. The 7th Illinois marched into Washington to a big review. He had the bunting from around the review stand, and that's what he's holding in that picture, burned in the fire. So he was, and then I think they give him ground. I'm not sure. I think that was part of the Civil War. That's how he ended up back in Saltville. Maybe,
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But he was raised tobacco there, had a tobacco farm. And that's where his sisters and, let's see, I was trying to think, he had some brothers. Can't remember. Aunt Pauline's got that stuff up there in big sheets. But when I was high school and stuff, we went down there. His brother, we stayed with my grandpa's brothers and his kids. And we went back to the reunions. We'd always go up to Saltville and stay and visit with Grandpa's relation there. But Saltville and Johnson City's not very far apart there.
Right.
Bristol's in the middle. And there's quite a bit of history down there.
Now, did you ever get to meet your grandpa's father? He passed away by the
No.
time.
My mother said she used to wash his feet
Okay.
when he was here, and said he would put $1.50 in the wash water because he had that pension.
Mhm.
And she said we used to fight over who was going to get wash his feet. So, but he stayed here,
Okay.
and that's why the rifle was here too.
Okay. Yep.
And I'd have to look it up when he died, but he probably died. See, my mother was born in 18. Yeah, let's see. 18. She was 38, 36. No, she's born in 16. So he died somewhere between 1916. No, could have died. No, he would have been alive because she was probably, like maybe 8 or 9, 10 years old.
Okay. Yeah.
So he probably died in the 20s.
In the 20s at some
sometime.
point. Okay.
And I was born in 34.
Mhm.
So, and I think, I'm starting to remember if his wife maybe was still alive. I know my grandmother's mother was still alive in Tennessee. She used to go down and visit her. And her dad's name was Thomas Morrow. And he was a deacon in the Baptist church. They were very religious. And my grandmother was very religious. So my grandfather wasn't too religious. I mean, he came from where they made their own whiskey,
Okay.
and he smoked cigars,
Okay.
and he's still got an old cigar stand out here at the Wash House.
Oh yeah.
But they were big in stores, opening country stores. His father, George, actually had a country store around Rome Mountain, and I think maybe his grandfather, Obadiah, maybe at one time was they call it a name for him, and but he come up here and opened this store in Maples Mill around 1899, maybe somewhere close. His brother John went up to Fairbury then and opened the store later. But he had two sisters that would have been Leonards that married Rakers
Okay.
from down in that part of the country. The Rakers come up here first. So he had two sisters that lived here around Canton,
Okay.
is how George got up here to enlist in Springfield.
I see.
And I think that's how my grandfather got up here, was through my grandmother had a brother that was a big cattle buyer, and he lived up at Toulon up here, had a real nice home. I mean, and that's how my grandmother came up here. She come up and visited him, and my grandfather then was running the store here. They knew each other from Tennessee, and then they were writing. We got some of the letters where he was writing her, really courting her in a way, and then he asked her to come up here. He wanted to marry her, and she took a train from Tennessee to Pekin, I think, rode a train up, and he went to Pekin with a horse and wagon, and somewhere, from what I can get, they could ford the Illinois River at that time. There was a ford somewhere where you could cross in a shallow place. He went to Pekin, they got married in Pekin, and then come back here to Maples Mill. They lived up across the hard road in a little house there, and he had the store going then. And Rakers owned the ground. So again, that would have been his brother-in-law. And so it was Leonard and Raker, the store. He did all the business. His brother-in-law owned the property. And later he took in his brother-in-law's son, Ernie Raker, and then the Depression wiped him out because nobody paid their bills.
Hmm.
So that is exactly how the Leonards fit in around here, how he got here to enlist in Springfield in the 7th. And what I could find out, he didn't enlist till the Civil War had been going for 2 years.
Okay.
He actually caught up with the 7th Illinois then down somewhere around Memphis or somewhere. And then he got in on the whole deal going through Atlanta and all the way through the swamps and back up to Washington. And very, very loyal to Lincoln and very much conservative Republican,
Mm-hmm.
probably from Lincoln. So that tells you a lot about the Leonard side.
Now, did your grandpa ever tell you stories about George Washington and the Civil War stuff, or did you find it all out after the fact?
See, he died when I was 3.
Oh, your grandpa did?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yes.
So your grandma really was
Yep.
just your grandma.
What she told me, some of the stuff, like they had some stuff written down which really wasn't 100% right, I don't think, about what he served in. But she did say that he said his second most prized possession next to his wife was a gun.
Really?
Probably the only reason any of us is here.
Yeah. We went to that
Yep.
that field in
They're in Altoona.
Altoona
up on
Pass.
that.
Yeah.
And had he died there, like many others,
Mm-hmm.
and when Jay and I was standing up there the first time, picked up a couple of rocks and stood up, and I said, you know, Jay, if he had died here, I wouldn't be here. He said, you're right. But that was a hell of a big battle. They held off the whole Southern Army, and the only thing that saved them, they thought Sherman was coming up behind them, and he didn't plan to. And all they were doing was holding that open so the railroad could bring supplies down to Sherman. So that's pretty interesting. And I took a trip. Geneva and I went down and took a bus trip with 2 guys, and we started there in Altoona. I'm not Altoona, but Smyrna, Georgia. And we traced where they'd come down through Dalton, which is south of Chattanooga, the 7th, or, you know, but he didn't dote on the 7th. So when I got to talking to him, he said, the big battle was at Altoona right above us. So Jay and I, or Geneva and I, drove up there one night. That's how we found it, and walked up there, and then Jay and us went up with his girlfriend, and we actually walked up and went through everything. And then Uncle John, I told him about it. He's coming back from Florida. He got there when they was making the dedication and putting up the pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and talked to one of the guys who was doing it. So, you know, when you can stand on the actual battlefields, it makes a difference. We traced it clear around to the south of Atlanta. They actually went around Atlanta, burnt the hell out of it, tore Atlanta to pieces, went around the south end, and then cut through to South Carolina. And we went with this tour clear around to the south end, and they showed us all these areas. Some of those areas are still just wild and woody woods. And he took us up in some places with blackberry briar stuff. He said, you know, they had defenses here and here and here. Most of it, Atlanta spread out and just took it all. But there's a rotunda down in Atlanta that you can sit in a seat, and it turns, and you see the whole Battle of Atlanta. And if you ever get down there, it's worth it. I'm telling you. I never even knew it existed. So, but now, if you got any questions, you know, you can ask me. I don't have a clue whether I know yet. But we've been into this, you know. Geneva's been into it. I've been into it. And some of my aunt, Pauline.
Yeah, I was going to
she's
say.
in it big time. In fact, Daughters of the American Revolution, we have people that goes back to Washington on my grandmother's side for sure. And One of them was an indentured servant to George Washington, and it goes back through the O'Briens and several others. But the Marls come over very early too, so earlier than the Leonards did.
Oh, wow.
So they were around probably the Revolutionary War. And that's where Aunt Pauline was daughters of the American Revolution. If you can trace your ancestry back to the Revolution, then you can get in that.
Interesting.
So I don't have any sympathy for people that come over here and demand to be treated like they are in Europe, because all our ancestors come over here to get away from the very stuff that people's wanting them to do now. You couldn't own land in Europe unless you were in a baron or an earl or something. Most of the people come over here so they could own their own land and be free. So part of the deal is people now are giving their freedom up for special privileges, which they're going to find out down the road freedom is better.
Now, what about, I mean, like Aunt Pauline, I mean, how much older than you? Was she like 20 years older than you?
Well, my mother was 18 years old.
And Pauline was younger or older than
Aunt Elizabeth was next. She was probably 20 years older. Pauline was probably, I want to say, 23 or 24 years old anyway.
Okay.
I know my grandmother was born in 1876.
Okay.
100 years.
Yep.
Since, 1776. I can remember her birthday, and my grandfather, I think, was maybe 10 years older than her.
Okay.
So he may have been born in 66.
That sounds about right.
Because he died in 1937, and I think he was 71.
Okay.
So that'd make it 66, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That much I've just backtracked on. But if you think about the people like her, what they've seen, I mean, they went from no cars, no airplanes, no really electricity, telephones, and she died in the 60s, and he died in 37. I remember that. I was 3. I can remember it. But your biggest problem is you don't know what questions to ask. If I could have asked, my grandmother even other questions, she knew the answers. And there's one of her nieces that's 106 still living that comes to the reunion.
Wow.
It's her youngest sister's daughter. And that's the one that Jay said, we need to go to the reunion because she probably, you don't know. And she lives down in Georgia. But Georgia's cemetery now is in Saltsville, which is Virginia. It's hard to get Virginia because you're right on the border. Saltville, Virginia, in the cemetery. And we've got pictures of it. And I've taken Bill down, and he's seen it, and had his picture taken there at the stone. And one of the Leonard grandsons was still alive, and he served the 8th Air Force, and lived right there by the cemetery. He took us up originally, and he laughed and he said, the Confederate daughters of the Confederacy go around every year and put things up on the graves. They had put one up on his grave, and they said he'd be spinning because, man, he was very
Yep.
very, very anti-Southern. And we run in, I told you that one guy down there that said he remembered George coming down. Did I tell you about Bowden?
I don't know.
This guy lived just down the road from where the old house burned. And he said, I was a little boy when George Leonard first came. And he said, at that time you had to walk down to the general store and register to vote and pay a poll tax. You had to pay a poll tax to vote. A lot to keep poor people from voting anyway. He said, my father took me down to the store. That was the general hangout, just like this one was. And we were sitting there, and George Leonard walked in, very trim, not a big guy, and walked up. He said, I'm down to pay my poll tax and register to vote. And he said, the store owner is pretty nosy. And he signed his name and paid his dollar or whatever it was. And he said, by the way, Mr. Leonard, how do you vote? And he said, how I damn well please. He was living with Southerners, and he was Northern, fought for the North. And but Saltville in Tennessee was 50-50, I think, you know.
Okay.
But his brother got conscripted into the South, and we don't know what happened to him. His name was James. He was killed with the Confederacy, and they didn't keep records. So people tried to find him, couldn't find out where it happened or what happened. But there was 3 brothers fought, 2 for the North, 1 for the South. All Leonards. And the Leonard name is almost died out.
Yep.
And it's a shame. My grandfather ended up with 4 girls. A lot of the others, a couple of them didn't get married down there, so had no kids. And this John Leonard down there, he had a heart attack, and he was fairly young here when we were visiting. So their Saltville Leonards are gone. And at one time there's a lot of them. Now, last time we were there, there's none.
You know, it's kind of funny that your grandpa had all girls, and then all his girls had boys.
Yes.
And then all their boys had boys.
I know. You know, it's weird. It really is.
I mean, it's sort of balanced out, at least in your line. We've
Yeah.
kind of balanced out girls and boys.
But it's a shame, I'm sure, you know. And probably come pretty close to me being called Leonard.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I heard that it was.
Yes, it was William Leonard.
Yeah.
And they changed it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could have been. And John Leonard Smith.
Okay.
They tried to keep the name. But it was a shame for them to lose the only boy.
Yeah. I'll bet that was tough. I'm sure.
Yep. So anyway, that's the Leonards. And
Yeah.
oh, I think Wade, who was here shooting the rockets,
Mm-hmm.
he wanted to sit down and go through your war stories.
Okay.
You know, which I don't have any fighting war stories.
Right.
But his grandpa was the same way. He went to Germany. That's who I was
Yep,
talking
yep.
to there. So he was interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I told him, I said, you know, hell, one of these days, because mainly you'd like to get the time and where you were at more than
Yep.
anything else.
Yep.
Because people that trace this.
I'd be interested in getting that too sometime, but this camera battery is